Xenobiologist Dr. James Carter was working at a remote research outpost on the frontier when he received an unexpected and deeply unwelcome summons. Immediate orders to report to the flagship of Queen Kelritha of the Thessaran Empire, for reasons the message didn't bother to disclose. Queen Kelritha was genuinely infamous across the entire known galaxy. Not merely powerful, actively and universally feared. Her reputation was built on ruthlessness that consistently bordered on actual cruelty. Political rivals who mysteriously disappeared after challenging her authority, entire star systems brought to absolute heel through calculated displays of overwhelming military force. Diplomatic negotiations, where she was known to make brutal examples of anyone who showed even slight weakness or disrespect. Stories about Queen Kelritha were the kind that got told in hushed, nervous voices. How she had personally executed her own senior advisor in front of the entire assembled court for providing inaccurate intelligence. How she had responded to a relatively minor colonial rebellion by completely devastating their primary city as a calculated lesson to others. How she demanded absolute submission from literally everyone in her presence, and those who failed to provide appropriately deferential behavior simply vanished without explanation. Most species in the Alliance gave the Thessaran Empire an extremely wide berth. You didn't casually refuse Queen Kelritha's direct summons. James had absolutely no idea why he specifically had been summoned. He was a xenobiologist studying extremophile organisms in remote frontier systems, not someone who typically attracted royal attention of any kind, certainly not from the galaxy's single most feared monarch. When he arrived at her massive flagship, he was escorted through corridors where crew members moved with the kind of silent, nervous efficiency that comes from genuine fear rather than mere discipline. Every single person he passed carefully avoided eye contact, spoke only in whispers when necessary, moved as if desperately trying not to attract any attention whatsoever. He was brought to an elaborate formal audience chamber where Queen Kelritha sat on an ornate throne, surrounded by advisors and armored guards who all maintained absolutely perfect stillness. She was objectively striking, beautiful in the way Thessaran nobility consistently tended to be, with the distinctive long ears and remarkably elegant features characteristic of her species. But there was something in her expression, in the precise way she looked at James as he entered, that suggested she was evaluating him exactly the way a predator evaluates potential prey. Dr. Carter, you're probably wondering why I've summoned you here specifically. Her voice was measured and controlled, carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. I am curious, yes. Several of her advisors looked genuinely shocked that he hadn't addressed her with proper honorifics or displayed more obvious deference and submission. Queen Kelritha's expression didn't visibly change, but James sensed dramatically increased attention suddenly focused entirely on him. You published a xenobiology research paper approximately 6 months ago analyzing Thessaran genetic markers and suggesting certain, distinctly unflattering, evolutionary origins for my species. James remembered the paper clearly. It had been straightforward academic analysis, suggesting the Thessaran species had evolved from pack hunters with significant aggressive territorial instincts that still manifested clearly in their contemporary political and social structures. Scientifically sound, empirically well-supported, but definitely not diplomatically tactful. I published peer-reviewed research based on comprehensive genetic and behavioral analysis. If you personally found the conclusions unflattering, that's not my professional concern. Science doesn't care about anyone's ego. The chamber went completely, utterly silent. Several advisors looked like they were witnessing someone deliberately sign their own death warrant in real time. Queen Kelritha stood from her throne, descending the steps toward James with deliberate, predatory movement. Her guards visibly tensed, clearly ready to respond instantly to any command. You realize exactly who I am, what I'm genuinely capable of. People have died for far less disrespect than what you just displayed. James met her gaze directly, absolutely refusing to look away or show any submission. You think I'm afraid of you? The words came out almost mocking, certainly not showing even a trace of the obvious fear everyone else in this chamber was clearly experiencing. Everyone is afraid of me. That's fundamentally how power actually works. Fear is a tool used primarily by people who fundamentally lack the ability to inspire genuine respect. You've built an entire empire on making people utterly terrified of the consequences of defying you. That's not real strength. It's compensation for the fact that without the manufactured fear, they wouldn't naturally choose to follow you. James knew objectively that what he was saying could very realistically get him executed. Queen Kelritha's brutal reputation wasn't exaggeration or propaganda. She genuinely had people killed for far less direct challenges to her authority. But something fundamental in him absolutely refused to perform the fear and submission everyone else showed her. Maybe it was the scientist in him analytically recognizing her behavioral patterns as dominance displays. Maybe it was just stubborn principle. But he wasn't going to bow to someone simply because they'd convinced everyone else to be terrified. Queen Kelritha was now standing directly in front of him, close enough that he could clearly see the anger in her expression. You're either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish. I'm honest. You summoned me here presumably to intimidate me about my research, to make me retract findings that you find politically inconvenient or personally offensive. I'm telling you directly that approach won't work because I'm not impressed by threats or theatrical displays of power. If you want to have an actual substantive conversation about the scientific validity of my research, I'm genuinely happy to discuss methodology and supporting evidence. If you just want me to bow and scrape and tell you how terrifying and powerful you are, you've completely wasted both our time. Her expression was remarkably complex, anger certainly, but also something that looked distinctly like genuine surprise and perhaps even curiosity. No one speaks to me this way. Then everyone around you is constantly lying through performance of fear. You're surrounded exclusively by people who tell you what they think you want to hear because they're utterly terrified of the consequences of honesty. That's not respect. That's not loyalty. It's cowardice you've systematically mistaken for devotion. Queen Kelritha stared at James for a long, tense moment, and he genuinely couldn't read whether she was about to have him immediately executed or something else entirely. Then she did something completely unexpected. She laughed. Not a cruel or mocking laugh, but what sounded like genuine amusement. "Dismissed," she said sharply to her advisors and guards. "All of you, leave us immediately." There was visible hesitation. Her guards clearly didn't want to leave her alone with someone who had just challenged her so directly and disrespectfully. But her command was absolute. The chamber emptied rapidly, except for James and the Queen. "You're absolutely right," she said once they were completely alone, her tone entirely different from the cold authority she'd displayed before. "Everyone around me constantly performs fear and submission. They tell me exclusively what they think I want to hear. They present carefully filtered information, specifically designed to avoid my anger rather than provide accurate assessment. I've built an entire empire on systematic terror. And the genuine cost is that I'm surrounded exclusively by cowards and sycophants who are completely useless for actual effective governance." James was processing this sudden dramatic shift. So the cruel, terrifying Queen reputation is pure performance. It's genuine in that I have actually done the things people fear. But those actions were calculated specifically to establish dominance, not expressions of actual cruelty for its own sake. I executed my advisor for providing deliberately false intelligence that directly cost lives. The public execution was theatrical performance, but the consequence itself was completely justified. I devastated that colonial city because allowing the rebellion to succeed would have encouraged countless others. The brutality was calculated, not sadistic. That's still fundamentally authoritarian rule through manufactured fear. Yes, and it's been remarkably effective at maintaining regional stability and preventing larger conflicts. But the cost is exactly what you identified. Everyone around me is constantly terrified, which means I get careful performance instead of truth, filtered information instead of honest assessment. You're the first person in literally years who's spoken to me honestly without paralyzing fear. I'm a xenobiologist from a remote research outpost. I have no political power you can meaningfully threaten, no significant ambitions you can exploit. Fear only works when you have leverage over what someone values. I value truth and scientific integrity. You can't threaten that effectively. Kelritha was studying him with intense interest now. The research paper you published analyzing Thessaran evolutionary psychology, it was scientifically accurate, peer-reviewed, empirically supported, methodologically sound. If you want to challenge the conclusions, you'll need to provide contradicting evidence, not just disapprove of the political implications. I don't want to challenge it. I want you to continue that research and provide completely honest analysis of Thessaran political psychology and social structures, without any fear of political consequences. I want someone who will tell me unfiltered truth rather than performing submission. Over the following months, James found himself in the genuinely bizarre position of serving as advisor to the galaxy's most feared queen, but not through fear or submission, through the blunt honesty that had first caught her attention. He analyzed Thessaran's social structures, political psychology, the evolutionary roots of their governmental systems. He provided remarkably blunt assessments that her other advisors would never dare offer. When she asked for his opinion on proposed policies, he told her honestly when he thought she was wrong, when her reliance on fear was counterproductive, when she was missing important perspectives. And she actually listened, not always agreeing with his assessments, but genuinely considering perspectives she wouldn't get from advisors who were too terrified to contradict her. "You're fundamentally changing how I govern," she told him during one of their regular sessions. "Having someone who challenges me without fear makes me question assumptions I'd stopped examining." Good. Unchallenged authority becomes tyranny almost inevitably. You built power on systematic fear. But if you want to build something that genuinely lasts beyond your personal dominance, you need structures built on more than pure terror. Their relationship evolved beyond purely professional advising. The woman who terrorized an empire was remarkably different in private contexts, still intellectually sharp, still ruthless when she judged it necessary, but also genuinely thoughtful, willing to admit uncertainty, capable of humor without the constant performance of cruelty. "People still fear me," she observed months into their working relationship. "But I'm relying substantially less on that fear for actual governance. Some of my advisors are starting to realize they can occasionally contradict me without being executed. That's largely your direct influence. You were already capable of ruling without pure fear. You just needed someone to demonstrate that honesty wouldn't destroy you." Years later, when people asked how James became one of the most influential advisors to Queen Kelritha, how someone with no political background or established power base had achieved such a position, he remained characteristically direct. "I refused to be afraid of her. Everyone else performed fear and submission, which made them completely useless for honest governance. I treated her like a person capable of handling truth rather than a tyrant who needed constant validation through fear." Turned out, she valued honesty substantially more than performance, once someone was actually willing to provide it. And Kelritha's perspective on their relationship. "He walked directly into my audience chamber and openly mocked me for relying on fear, called me out for surrounding myself with cowards, refused to bow or perform any submission. For the first time in years, someone spoke to me honestly without calculation or terror. That honesty was more valuable than 1,000 advisors who tell me what they think I want to hear." His courage challenged me to be better than the reputation I'd built. Their partnership became a widely recognized example of how even the most ruthless authority can be fundamentally changed by someone willing to speak truth without fear, and how sometimes the strongest possible challenge to power is simply refusing to perform the submission that power demands. "You think I'm afraid of you?" became the moment that changed everything, not because fear disappeared, but because one person's refusal to perform it created space for something better than rule through terror.